Welcome to a channel where secrets refuse to stay buried, and every story is driven by tension, betrayal, and the dangerous choices people make when pushed to their limits. Here, we explore dark, character-focused narratives filled with psychological conflict, hidden motives, and emotional collapse. Each episode peels back layers of trust to reveal what happens when loyalty turns toxic and truth becomes a threat. If you're drawn to intense drama, moral ambiguity, and stories that keep tightening until there's no escape, you've found the right place. The investigation began not as a pursuit of justice, but as an emotional necessity that Tomas nor Madison could ignore. Bill's collapse after drinking the tea had left a residue of unease that refused to fade, a sense that something deliberate and malicious had slipped through unnoticed. Tomas approached the matter with disciplined restraint, yet beneath his calculated exterior simmered a quiet fury. He had trusted the environment around Bill, trusted the people allowed close enough to serve something as intimate as a cup of tea. That trust now felt like a personal failure, and the weight of that realization pressed heavily on him. Madison, by contrast, carried her anger openly, though it fractured in unpredictable ways. The poisoning awakened old wounds. She had never fully healed memories of betrayal disguised as concern, harm delivered under the guise of care. Each step of the investigation ignited those memories, blurring the line between past and present. She was not simply trying to uncover what poisoned Bill. She was confronting the pattern of manipulation that had followed her through different relationships, different faces, always wearing the same mask of innocence. Together, Tomas and Madison formed an uneasy alliance, bound less by trust than by mutual obsession. They moved through evidence with an intensity that bordered on reckless, aware that every detail mattered, and that time was not on their side. The tea itself became a symbol of violation, something once ordinary transformed into a weapon. Tomas focused on composition, tracing the chemical residue with methodical precision, while Madison tracked the human element, the motives, the behavioral shifts, the subtle changes in routine that pointed toward intent rather than accident. As their findings grew more concrete, so did the tension between them. Tomas struggled with the implications of what they were uncovering. The poison was not crude or impulsive. It had been chosen carefully, administered with patience. This realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. It suggested premeditation, a willingness to wait, to smile, to serve, all while planning irreversible harm. The idea that someone close to Bill could harbor such calculated malice challenged Tomas's belief in rational self-interest. This was not desperation, it was strategy. Madison, meanwhile, was driven by a darker impulse. She did not merely want the truth exposed, she wanted consequences. The closer they came to identifying the substance, the more her anger sharpened into something almost predatory. She began to recognize the emotional architecture behind the crime, a desire not just to hurt Bill, but to control the narrative around his suffering. That recognition made her blood run cold, because it mirrored dynamics she knew too well. The poison was not just meant to kill. It was meant to silence, to erase resistance. Hayley sensed the shift long before her name entered the scope of suspicion. The air around her changed subtly, conversations becoming more guarded, movements more deliberate. She told herself she was imagining it. That anxiety was a natural response to crisis, but the truth gnawed at her relentlessly. Every new development in Bill's condition felt like a tightening noose, each unanswered question, a reminder of the risk she had taken. She had believed the act was flawless, that the choice of poison and method would dissolve into ambiguity. Now, that confidence began to crumble. What terrified Hayley most was not exposure, but recognition. She feared the moment when Tomas's analytical gaze and Madison's instinctive scrutiny would align, when logic and intuition would converge on her with undeniable clarity. She had underestimated Madison, assuming emotional volatility equated to unpredictability. Instead, Madison's fury had honed her perception, making her acutely sensitive to inconsistencies Hayley could no longer conceal. The investigation forced each character into confrontation with their own moral boundaries. Tomas wrestled with the realization that truth, once uncovered, would devastate more than it healed. He questioned whether exposing the poison would truly serve justice, or merely satisfy an abstract principle, at the expense of human wreckage. Yet every time doubt surfaced, the image of Bill's weakened body erased it. Neutrality, Tomas understood, was no longer an option. Madison's internal conflict cut deeper. Her desire for accountability clashed with a grim awareness of what exposure would unleash. She recognized the familiar cycle: uncover the truth, watch relationships implode, bear the guilt of being the catalyst. Still, she could not stop. Anger had become her compass, guiding her through moral gray zones she once avoided. She told herself this was about Bill, about preventing further harm. But beneath that rationale lay a more personal need to prove that silence was not her destiny. Hayley's fear manifested in increasingly desperate behavior. She clung to composure as if it were armor, yet the cracks widened with every passing day. The investigation robbed her of sleep, of appetite, of the ability to maintain the illusion of control. She replayed her decisions obsessively, justifying them as necessary, inevitable. Bill had stood in her way, she reasoned, his presence a constant threat to what she believed she deserved. The poison had been a solution, not an act of cruelty. But the logic felt thinner each time she repeated it. As Tomas and Madison narrowed their focus, the environment itself seemed to conspire against all of them. Routine spaces took on an ominous quality. Ordinary objects transformed into reminders of vulnerability. Trust eroded silently, replaced by suspicion that infected every interaction. The closer the truth came, the more volatile the emotional landscape became, until even restraint felt like an act of violence against oneself. Hayley reached a breaking point when she realized that the investigation was no longer abstract. Tomas's findings and Madison's deductions were converging, stripping away the margin of error she had relied on. Panic surged, not as hysteria, but as a cold, calculating terror. She considered escape, deflection, even further deception, but each option carried its own risks. The walls were closing in, and every path forward seemed to lead to exposure. The final phase of the investigation pushed all three to their limits. Tomas confronted the burden of certainty, knowing that proof would destroy any remaining ambiguity. Madison stood at the edge of emotional collapse, her anger threatening to consume the very purpose that fueled it. Hayley hovered between defiance and surrender, trapped by the consequences of a choice she could no longer undo. What emerged from this convergence was not resolution, but collision. The poison in Bill's tea became the catalyst for a deeper reckoning, one that exposed the fragility of trust, the danger of unchecked ambition, and the destructive power of secrets sustained by fear. Each character was forced to confront the version of themselves they had tried hardest to deny. In the end, the investigation did not simply reveal what had been poured into a cup of tea. It exposed the silent agreements people make with their darkest impulses, the rationalizations that turn intent into action, and the moment when survival instincts eclipse morality. Tomas and Madison moved forward, carrying the weight of what they had uncovered, while Hayley remained suspended in the aftermath of her own design, cornered not just by evidence, but by the undeniable truth that her greatest enemy had always been herself. As the story reaches its end, there is no sense of victory, only the heavy silence that follows irreversible choices. The truth, once uncovered, does not heal the damage it exposes. It simply forces every character to face the cost of their own intentions. Tomas is left carrying the burden of knowledge, aware that uncovering the poison also poisoned the last remnants of trust around him. Madison moves forward hardened by what she has seen, her anger no longer explosive, but quietly consuming, reshaping how she views loyalty and justice. Hayley, trapped by her own actions, discovers too late that control is an illusion that collapses the moment fear takes hold. What remains is a haunting reminder that betrayal rarely announces itself loudly. It grows in secrecy, fed by ambition, resentment, and silence. This ending offers no comfort, only the unsettling truth that when people are pushed into corners, survival often comes at the expense of morality, and some consequences linger far beyond the moment the truth is revealed.